So how exactly have these attacks against innocent civilians affected the way Germans think about migration policies, political parties, and the leadership of Chancellor Angela Merkel? To talk about that, we have some polling results. We have Charlotte Potts from our political bureau in the studio as well. Let's look at the polls first. Pollsters at Infratest DMAP have surveyed public opinion here for the German broadcaster AfD. They asked if people are worried that there will be terror attacks in Germany in the near future. And the response is very clear and chilling. 3/4 of the Germans polled in this representative survey do fear terror attacks. Only 1/5 of the respondents do not expect any more terror violence. So let's talk now with our political correspondent, Charlotte Potts. Charlotte, there are real fears now here in Germany, ones that didn't exist before, you could say. Was this trend building over time, considering what's happening in neighboring France? We go from Charlie Hebdo to the Bataclan Theater. In light of the terror attacks there, or is this linked more directly to the week that changed Germany?
Yes, actually, this trend was absolutely building over time. If you look at the numbers, we had the attacks on Charlie Hebdo, on the satirical magazine, in January of 2015. And at that time, half of Germans were worried that a terror attack might be happening in Germany at some point. So with the Paris attacks, with the Brussels attacks last March, this fear has continuously grown. And since April, there's a 9% increase. And so this trend has also grown in comparison to before those recent attacks in Germany. So they definitely had an impact. Interestingly so, the impact was not as significant as we could have expected. Maybe, and that sounds cynical, because there weren't as many casualties as in the attacks in other countries.
The casualty level certainly played a role there, I would imagine. There's been a number of proposals to help Germans feel safer and to make them safer as well. Could you fill us in on some of those, Charlotte?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was great worry after the attacks, of course. 2 of these attacks were carried out by asylum seekers, and there was a huge public uproar also against Angela Merkel. So she proposed a set of measures, 9 measures to make Germans safer. One is, for example, an agency that's going to decipher internet communication. She wants to have stronger ties with other intelligence services around the world. And most importantly, though, they want to prepare the army to deploy within Germany, so within the country, to help out the police if in case there is a terror attack. So that is politically highly discussed right now.
That's very controversial, Charlotte, isn't it? Deploying the German army on the streets. We haven't seen that since, well, World War II.
Absolutely, and that's why we have to go back in history to see why many Germans are feeling opposed to that. And also within the political parties, within the German government, within the coalition, there's a lot of discussion about that right now going on. Interestingly so, though, one number I want to mention on the safety factor, these measures apparently have not made Germans feel more safer, these announced measures by Angela Merkel. Many, as we just saw, are worried about a possible attack. Many more now, a large majority, are keeping an eye on suspicious people, suspicious luggage. So there's definitely overall that fear that a terrorist attack might happen also in Germany.
Part of the concern about those measures is that there was nothing new in the new measures. They're actually old measures. So I'm sure the political leadership will have to readdress this issue and come up with some new approaches. Well, last year, Charlotte, stay with us. We'll be getting back to you in just a bit. Chancellor Angela Merkel effectively declared Germany's borders open to those fleeing war and persecution. More than 1 million refugees came to Germany. Critics warned that uncontrolled mass migration might allow terrorists to slip into the country. So have last month's attacks swayed public opinion against Merkel's keynote policy? Pollsters Infratest DMAP asked if people were satisfied with Merkel's refugee policies. Here, too, the response is clear. Almost 2/3 of Germans are not satisfied with the way the chancellor has handled things. Now she has only about 1/3 of voters behind her on this. Okay, let's ask Charlotte about this. Charlotte, how do you break this down regarding party affiliation. Are Angela Merkel's followers her biggest supporters right now? I mean, who's backing the chancellor?
It's very interesting. So actually, her own party, the CDU, the Christian Democrats, is divided 50-50 on this issue. So she's going to face a lot of pressure in her own party in the upcoming months. Her strongest support comes from the Green Party, which is showing that her policies are just not as conservative as her party expected them to be. And of course, we see a huge backlash within the Alternative for Germany. They are anti-immigrant, right-wing populists, and almost 100% of the members of that party strongly oppose, of course, Angela Merkel's refugee policies at this point.
Okay, I have to say that the Infratest first polled satisfaction on this last fall. How have things changed since then?
So there always was a strong backlash against those welcoming policy of Angela Merkel, her decision to open the borders. Half of Germans always were opposed to that, half of Germans supported it. So you really saw a strong divide there. And now you can see that 2/3 of Germans are unsatisfied with her policies. That's going to put huge pressure on her. She has made clear in recent weeks, last week, very strongly that she believes that we can manage this refugee crisis, that things are moving forward, that integration is happening with those 1 million refugees that arrived last year. But still, her optimism apparently did not stick with the German people.
Yeah, a lot of people are having difficulty understanding, and we see that in the polls, that optimism. How has the chancellor's personal popularity been holding up in light of all of this?
Yeah, so when you compare Angela Merkel's approval ratings since 2013, they were at 47%. They're at 47% now. That is nearly an all-time low since 2013. Her policies, her refugee policies, that always played a role with the approval ratings. It's very much attached to that. So if things are not going well, as they are at the moment with the refugee policies, her approval ratings are going down. And this is going to play a major role for her. This is not only going to put pressure on her, but she also needs to take the decision soon if she's going to run again in the general elections, which we have here in Germany next autumn. And she's been very quiet about that topic so far.
Okay, well, we'll certainly hear some more from the chancellor, no doubt, coming up. You know, the Infratest asked which party would you vote for if there were parliamentary elections in Germany coming up on Sunday, the famous Sunday question. Let's take a look at some of those results. There has been very little change since last month. 34% would still vote for Angela Merkel's Conservatives, her coalition partners. The Social Democrats also unchanged at 22%. The Greens, exactly where they were in July, 13%. Right behind them, the right-wing newcomers, Alternative for Germany, the AfD, still in fourth place. It goes back and forth in a lot of polls with the Greens, 12% there. They've not gained, interestingly, as a result of the terror attacks. The Left Party also unchanged with 9%, and the Free Democrats losing slightly. 5% puts them right at the threshold of support they need to win seats in the Bundestag. Conceivably, they couldn't get in if Germans were voting this Sunday, if they fell below that 5%. Charlotte, this is a surprise, don't you think? The AfD stuck exactly where it was, in spite of the terror attacks. They were hoping to ride that tide of growing concern about the migration situation. What do you make of the AfD showing?
Yeah, it's very interesting. They should have actually gained support during this time, especially with two of the attackers being asylum seekers. I think they had so many fights in their leadership in recent months that they just couldn't show off that unity and find a clear path, find a clear course on how they wanted to approach this issue. What we are seeing, though, in these trends is that the fringes are growing. So if you call the Green Party, the Left Party, AfD, they are gaining support amongst voters, and the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats that are in the coalition government right now, so Germany's main traditional parties, they are losing ground overall if you look at the polls this past year. And this is a trend, so the main parties losing support, the fringes growing that we see all over Europe, that is playing out in Germany right now as well.
What's interesting about these results when you look at them is you would expect the coalition, the governing coalition, to be losing support when one of its key policies is increasingly unpopular, but that's not really happening. How do we explain that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, you know, in times of crisis, people look to a strong leader. Merkel has been very calm and collected. Last time we heard from her in a press conference last week where she addressed all these issues for 1.5 hours, and she really presented a plan. So I think some people are looking for her as that strong leader, and in that way, half Germans feel satisfied with the government. Interestingly, so the polls also show that 44% are very, very much unsatisfied with the German government at this time. So it's really a polarized issue here where you have half Germans supporting the government and half of the Germans not supporting the government. And so you can't really tell if they are losing support or not at the moment. You have to see how it plays out in the long term.
It is very interesting how the polarization isn't affecting the grand coalition.
Exactly.
Okay.
Not as much, apparently.
Charlotte, stay with us, if you would. We have last month's attempted coup in Turkey now, and that sent a shudder around the world, and especially here in Germany. Since then, the government has been cracking down on the military, the judiciary, teachers, academics, civil servants, you name it. Thousands of people have been arrested or fired, stoking fears that Turkey's increasingly authoritarian course could endanger democracy there. The concern is shared by German voters. 9 out of 10 think Turkish democracy is at risk from the purge unleashed by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on practically every facet of public life. Well, we're back with Charlotte. Charlotte, what do you think? German voters are very concerned about events in Turkey. Do they accept the Turkish government's assertion that the arrests and suspension are necessary to protect democracy?
Absolutely not is a clear answer. 90% of Germans, so 9 in 10 Germans, think that these measures, firing teachers and journalists and judges, that these measures are not really necessary to keep the Turkish democracy going. So you see a huge backlash in German public opinion against Erdogan, against these Turkish measures. And I think one thing that is very important to keep in mind is that Turkish-German relations just not have been at its best in recent months. So this is a trend that has been also continuing over time. We've seen that Erdogan reacted quite harshly to criticism, not only from the German government, but also from the German public, from comedians who made fun of him. So all these things really stuck apparently with the German public, and that you can tell in those high numbers of disapproval for Erdogan's actions at the moment.
And, you know, in the German public's mind, you know, we have to remember that Germany's home to the biggest Turkish expatriate community on the planet. Yeah. And they've been out on the streets, a lot of pro-Erdogan demonstrations. What do German voters want to see the government do right now regarding Turkey?
So it's very interesting. The German government, there's so much at stake right now. The European Union has that refugee deal with Turkey. Turkey also plays a major role for the European Union in the fight against the Islamic State, in finding a solution in Syria. So the German government has been very careful, has been holding back, especially Merkel, in criticizing Erdogan and the Turkish government. And Germans are absolutely rejecting that notion of not criticizing Erdogan. Again, 9 in 10 people think the German government should take higher action, should criticize, even though that would mean losing the refugee deal. Germans don't seem to care. Yeah. But Germans in general in the polls show that they don't care very much about that. They just want to see harsher criticism of Turkey and of the measures that Erdogan has been taking there.
Charlotte Potts from our political bureau. Thanks so very much for those insights this morning, Charlotte. Look forward to seeing you again on the show. Well, as we've been reporting, the 2016 Olympics kick off later today in Rio. Hundreds of Russian athletes will be competing, that despite revelations of widespread state-sponsored doping, seemingly sanctioned at the highest levels in Moscow. The International Olympic Committee came in for heavy criticism after it decided not to slap a blanket ban on all Russian athletes. Germans, by a large majority, think that's the right decision by a margin of 2-1. 2/3 of poll respondents agree with the IOC's decision to allow individual sports federations to decide who they want to send.